Hi, you're listening to episode 2 of the Women in Depth podcast. Hi, and welcome back to the Women in Depth podcast. Today, our guest is Alicia Taverner. Alicia is a marriage and family therapist in Rancho Cucamonga, California, and her specialties are working with couples and individuals on relationship issues, specifically couples who have experienced infidelity and are struggling with the impact of an affair. And she also works with couples who are considering or moving towards divorce. Hi, Alicia, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Lourdes. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Well, I'm honored that you're here to share your insights and wisdom. I know that working with couples is a passion for you and a focal point, and that's why I knew that I would love to hear more about how you do your work and that it would also be beneficial to our listeners. So, Alicia, could you just start off by sharing a little bit about your practice and the work that you do?
Sure. So my purpose is to help women. That's something that I think I've been driven to for many years. And so I started my practice, I think I would say, how many years has it been now? Maybe over 5 years. And my focus, like I said, has always been women, but that often translates into relationships. And so I love working with couples. Part of my practice is made up of women who are putting themselves back together after divorce or after, big breakup. The other part of my practice is made up of couples who are struggling to put their relationship back together after infidelity. And so that includes sometimes singles as well. I have women who come to me who have had an affair and their relationship has ended, but I also have women who come to me who have been affected by an affair. And so I like to be careful in the language that I use. I don't always want to call the person who has been cheated on the victim, because I think that both parties are victims in the relationship. Both partners end up being injured. And, the language is always a challenge in describing what I do. But so it's a variety of couples and individuals, and mostly focusing with women. So I'm happy to be here on your podcast to talk to all of the female listeners.
Yeah, and what you were describing, just about all the different aspects of relationship and then leading that into all the different aspects of affairs. And there's so many different ways that an affair impacts a relationship and a person. And I think that this is a topic that, even though it happens so much, because I was looking at some statistics to prepare for our conversation, and one of the things that I saw was that, and this is reported, that males, between 25 to 75% of all males and 15 to 60% of all women at one point will engage in an affair. And then another psychologist who specializes in internet research, and his practice is focused on affairs, he interviewed 3,600 people who had had affairs, and based on his statistics, he was estimating that affairs affect one of every 2.7 couples. Mm-hmm. So really, the impact of infidelity is far-reaching. I would say that everyone at some point in their life will be somehow touched by an affair, whether it's their own relationship, a parent, a spouse, a friend. And so I think that having a conversation about affairs and exploring some of the aspects of it that are maybe more difficult and uncomfortable is really a meaningful topic, not just for women, but it's really something that's happening as a society everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I like those statistics, and I found some of my own also in preparing for our talk today. And AMFT, which is the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, reported that 50% of couples who initiated therapy treatment do so due to an affair or an extramarital incident. And so even defining affair, especially in the age of technology, gets tricky. There's not one definite definition to what an affair actually is. But the interesting statistic that I found was that 90% of people polled disapprove of extramarital affairs, yet 50% of couples who initiate treatment do so because of an affair. So that's a huge paradox. And
Yeah.
they also reported that 15% of wives and 25% of husbands had extramarital intercourse. And I think, when I look at those numbers, I think it's a bit skewed. I think that it's probably closer to 40% or 50% of couples experience some type of extramarital incident in their relationship, but they're just not talking about it.
Yeah, it's amazing that you look at those numbers and to think that this is something that's not really talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, like you said, those numbers of 90% of all people who were polled don't approve of affairs. So just really interesting statistics and just to begin to explore what that all means.
Mm-hmm.
And I particularly liked how you mentioned the importance of languaging, because that connects to what you just shared about how even describing what an affair is, because I would imagine that even within a relationship, defining what the affair is so that both parties agree on that it is an affair has to be a challenge as well.
Right. We don't go and say our vows and say, well, I'm not going to look at other people's pictures on the internet. I'm not going to friend ex-boyfriends or ex-girlfriends. Those things aren't usually talked about when you step into marriage. And what constitutes drawing the line is different for everybody.
So in your experience, Alicia, what have been people's experience, or how would they describe an affair? How is that showing up in people's lives?
Well, the way that I define it, when people come to my office and couples come to my office and they say, my partner's had an affair, I don't necessarily ask for all the torrid details. Well, what does that mean? Did he have an ongoing affair with a secretary that worked in his office? Or was he on a dating app or something of that sort? Was he engaged in email conversations or interactions with somebody? It's difficult to define, but the way that I do define it is anything that feels like a violation of your trust in the relationship.
I like that because it really meets every person where they're at and honors what their experience of that would be like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there's a huge psychological impact of the affair. And so when people experience this, and not just women, I think men and women experience it differently. However, there's a feeling of like a loss in your identity. You might feel that your sense of specialness in this relationship is lost or it's gone. Many people experience a decline in self-respect because of the way that they've approached getting their partner back, or they've approached talking to their partner about their affair or questioning. They also feel a loss of control over their thoughts and their actions. And so their judgment is clouded by this incident. And so whether you define it as sleeping with somebody in your home that you share with your partner, or you define it as having intimate conversations over the phone with somebody else, when all of those things are present, it's a huge violation.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, that just the way that you described it, that captures a lot of the different experiences and makes room for what people might say, well, that was just me emailing someone, or we're just friends. It's really how it's perceived and experienced by the partner.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, it's not really, defining really isn't up to the partner who is engaging in the affair. It's really, how does my significant other experience this and view this?
Yeah, I completely agree, because we can get caught up, and a lot of times, I have couples who sit on my couch across from me, and we kind of go into this rabbit hole of dissecting the minutia. Well, I didn't call on this night, and it was, only a 2-minute conversation versus a 20-minute conversation, and none of that is really relevant. What's relevant is the emotional impact that it has on the partner who is on the receiving end.
Alicia, can you share a little bit about what you've observed as far as how women differ from men when it comes to affairs?
Sure. So I think I don't like to overgeneralize, but what I've seen and, what I've read in a lot of the research is that men tend to become angry over the affair and women tend to internalize it. And so let's say you're a woman and your partner has cheated. A lot of times women will internalize it and say something is wrong with me. The cause of their affair in their mind is them. And men don't appear to do that as much. Men become angry and they take that out on other people, whether it be in action or in fantasy. They picture themselves hurting their wife's lover. They picture themselves doing heinous things, but it's not likely that they're going to act on it. However, they just experience it a little bit differently. And women, I think, are more likely to want to repair the relationship, where men find it easier to start over.
That's very interesting. And when it comes to participating in affairs, what are the differences that you have observed between men and women?
I think it's the same. I think that we have a notion or the thought that men cheat more, but I don't think so. I think that it happens across all sexes and all genders, and even in gay and lesbian relationships. I think it's equal.
Interesting. When you think about how a relationship becomes vulnerable to an affair, what are the things that are happening between the two individuals that kind of creates, a vulnerability where an affair can actually, kind of come through those cracks in this foundation?
That's a great question. I actually recently wrote a blog post about 5 things that get in the way and create the opportunity for infidelity in relationships. And so one of them is time. And what I mean by that is the passage of time in the relationship. Initially, everything is all about these two people. When you come into a relationship, you have this infatuation. And we know from some of the research about the brain that it's like a drug.
Yeah.
Our lives completely revolve around this new person in our lives, and it's all consuming. And so your focus is this person, your focus is making this person happy and connecting with this other person because it just feels so good in the beginning stages of relationship. But as time passes, 2 become 3. We have children. If you decide to go that route, you have children, and 2 becomes 3 and then 4. And the focus is no longer on the relationship. The focus is on family. And so other things that get in the way are things like children. And I love my children as much as anybody, but they take up a lot of time. And to be a really good parent, it's time consuming and it tries every ounce of patience that you have in your being to be a good parent. And that's just the reality. And so when you're exhausted from working and taking care of kids, the last thing that you want to do sometimes is make love to your partner or even spend an additional 20 minutes having a conversation with them about the day. You just want to kind of veg out. And so these patterns take over. And I think in our society, we overparent our children. They're involved in 100 different activities. So, you become like this Uber driver. You just are running around town, dropping them off and doing all of these things for your kids. And I don't think that's a good example to set for them. The world doesn't revolve around them and your relationship is important. I think career gets in the way too. Initially, when you're in that infatuation and falling in love stage, it's easy to kind of put your career a little bit to the side. But when you have children and a family to support, I think career aspirations tend to grow. People become more involved in career. And so they're not, again, spending the time on the relationship.
So Alicia, at first I just love what you're sharing because what it says also is that just the natural progression of a relationship can put a relationship at risk or make it vulnerable to infidelity. Mm-hmm. And also just thinking about, at the beginning when you have all those endorphins rushing through your body and mm-hmm. this is feeling so good, I think later on, when that's no longer happening, people can tend to believe that, wow, I don't feel that anymore, so something's wrong.
Yes, Yes, I think that's a huge misperception and misconception that people have. It's like, well, it used to be passionate. It used to be, I couldn't stop thinking about him. And now all I think about is what I'm going to make for dinner and how I'm going to get my kid to go to bed at, an appropriate time tonight. But it's love and relationships evolve. And so that connection is so important because in those things that I'm listing and these things that can get in the way, what the common denominator is disconnection and loneliness. That's what causes people to be vulnerable for affairs. When you feel a disconnection from your partner and you feel lonely in your relationship, that allows you the opportunity to look elsewhere. That's what kind of sparks that idea. And I don't think nobody's immune to it. We all have the affinity and the ability within us to have an affair if the timing and I guess, everything kind of falls into place. Nobody comes into my office and says, I planned on having an affair. Nobody says that. They say, I didn't plan on this happening. I didn't think it would happen to me. I didn't think that, spending those long hours at work and connecting with this colleague would turn into something like that. I wasn't even attracted to her, or I just didn't think it would happen, is what I hear so often. But it's a combination and a culmination of all of these things that happen in the relationship with your partner where you're feeling lonely or I think that people have affairs because it makes them feel alive. It makes them feel excited. And so it's much like that excitement that we experience in the initial stages in our relationship. And so having those extra conversations, having a person that you're connecting with, it feels new and it feels nice and it feels like something inside you that may have been stifled because of the constant responsibility that comes along with the transitions in our lives. But that kind of gets awakened. And so people have the capacity to have an affair.
And I think that when you are, in the day-to-day of life of being a parent, paying bills, just the stress and the stuff that goes along with everyday life, when an affair occurs, the comparison between what's happening with the affair partner versus what's happening with your husband or wife or significant other, it probably really just pales in comparison because
it's like a vacuum, or you exist on this island. It's not real. It's not reality. And I think people also get addicted to sometimes the thought that I might get caught. That's exciting to some people, and not in the sense that they're being mischievous, but in the sense that it's a possibility. And so it increases in the level of excitement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Because, you said that a lot of times people engage in affairs just to feel alive. And I would say part of that feeling alive is like the high or the excitement of being in a relationship or in a sexual connection with someone that is outside of your marriage or your primary relationship.
Yeah, you're not potty training with this person. You're not, you're not planning a vacation that includes, do we take the crib? Do we take the playpen? Do we, do all of these stuff that happens in our everyday life with our partner it's right. Not glamorous, and sometimes, it just sucks. And you're not staying up all night with a teething child, or you're not running back and forth to take your teenager, to swim practice. The affair exists in a vacuum. It exists in just the connection, and that's all it's about. So it's addicting.
So this kind of segues into the next part of this, because you've described some of the things that lead to an affair occurring. But these same items that we've talked about are also really the key to preventing an affair.
Yes. So I don't want to glamorize the affair, but it's reality. And so, as a therapist, I have to be able to find empathy for both parties. I have to be able to understand why a person would be attracted to finding someone outside of their marriage. And it's a reality. It happens. And are they remorseful? Yes, very much so. The clients that I see are very remorseful, but what I also see in my practice is that the couples who are committed to doing the work and wanting to get past this come out with an even stronger bond than they ever had before. And sometimes it's the greatest thing that's ever happened to their relationship. It's not something that I recommend, but it increases the communication in a way that they've never had before. And so going back to your question about how do we prevent this, I don't think any relationship is affair proof. We can't affair proof our relationship, but what we can do is we can work on the friendship and the connection and the commitment to connecting. Because when you are caring for children or caring for an aging parent, it takes you out of your home, it takes you out of your focus with your partner. And so your focus has to be the friendship and getting back to that as much as possible. Because when you're friends with somebody, and there's betrayal in regular friendships, but that connection is what keeps you together.
So really nurturing that connection, prioritizing that connection, staying connected through the stress and grind of, having a budget, paying bills, being a parent, all the things that are like, they're not glamorous, they're not sexy or fun, but yet that connection is really the key to, I guess, the best thing you can do to keep your relationship strong and not vulnerable to an affair, even though, like you said, nothing is 100%, but this is what you can do.
And the open communication. If you're working a lot and you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed, and sometimes your partner, it's easy to get upset about that. I see couples where they resent their partner for working. And so that causes the working partner to feel isolated. Well, I can't talk to my wife about my work because she just becomes upset that I'm working too much. So then that creates that isolation, that creates that ability to have another life at work, which might include another partner who understands, and it starts very slowly. And a lot of times it starts with, well, I was working late and so-and-so was on this project with me and we just started talking. They start talking about the lack that they feel in their marriages. They start talking about just things that connect them that their partner probably can't understand or doesn't want to understand because of that resentment. So, you can see it slowly unfolding and starting to happen. But if in that initial time frame when that resentment is starting to build, if you can have open dialogue and conversation because you have a great foundation in your relationship, I think that creates a space for connection. It creates a space for being open and even saying, I'm attracted to this woman at work, or I'm attracted to my boss, and I want to be open and honest with you about it so you can keep me accountable as well.
I love that, what you're describing as far as remaining connected, even through difficult emotions or feelings or difficult disclosures, like if you having to share with your husband that you resent him for working so much. That's difficult for a lot of people to think about even discussing with their loved one. But what I'm taking from what you're saying is that there's, I think, a natural tendency in many of us to, okay, things aren't going well, so we disconnect. We kind of pull away or we withdraw. And one of the things I try to work on with my couples is to always be moving towards the other person, despite what's happening, to stay connected through conflict, because I think it's so easy to shut down and disconnect when things aren't going well. It almost seems to go against what feels right to move towards your partner when you're upset with them or when you're hurt.
Yeah, but those are the times when it's so important to have that connection, but also like to seek counseling, because those are the smaller issues. I see infidelity as a bigger issue. That's a higher mountain to climb than I'm feeling lonely in the relationship and how can we connect? Those are your minor problems, things that can be fixed with the right amount of communication and exercises and consulting with somebody else.
So, Alicia, I wanted to touch on something you shared earlier. And I think this is something that, a lot of people may have strong feelings about. But you had shared that looking at both people in the relationship when you are beginning to heal from an affair. And I know that there are some listeners out there who are asking the question, perhaps, with some strong feelings of, so am I to blame for my partner's affair? So I really kind of wanted you to maybe share a little bit more about that, because I think that that is also something that comes up in therapy. And it's a big part of the healing as to how you view how you got to this point in the marriage.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to, both partners are responsible for the affair. And it's really hard to hear, especially if you're the injured partner, if you're on the receiving end. And I think people sometimes become upset with me when I say that. But it's important to take a really good look at your relationship and what areas did you fall short. Because once you are able to understand those things, then you can really take a good inventory and decide if this is something that I want to repair. Is this something that I want to move on from? Do I want to end the relationship? A lot of the work I do with women is helping them to make the best decisions about their relationship and what to do for themselves and their futures and their children. And so it is about taking an inventory and trying to understand what responsibility you had in your partner's affair. Was it, did I spend too much time with my kids? And that's really hard to hear. It's hard to hear that, preparing a teenager for college and wanting them to have all of those extracurricular activities and being so involved took you away from your marriage. And then that caused your partner to stray. But there's responsibility on both parts and both ends. And so part of the healing process is understanding that and taking responsibility for it and then, healing from it. And that might look like couples therapy where both partners are invested in making the necessary changes and learning how to communicate appropriately. It might look like, the end of the relationship and learning how to do this on your own. And what happens a lot of times is people think that I'm just going to end the relationship and I'll start over. But a lot of those problems start to trickle into the next relationship because you haven't dealt with them.
What you're saying is so right on. I've shared too with couples that if you don't address this and learn how to relate differently, it'll happen in whatever relationship you're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can leave, but you have to take yourself with you.
Right. Right.
And I don't like to sound harsh about it, but I think I'm that kind of therapist. I'm not going to just and yes and nod my head the entire time. I like to push my clients to move in a place of growth because sometimes someone has to call us on our BS in order to get us to a point where we are able to grow and see what we don't know and see what we can see.
And so really this aspect of each person looking at themselves and looking at how they have contributed to this situation is really part of the transition to creating a new marriage. And I remember reading a quote, and I think it was Esther Perel, so you'll probably let me know if I'm right or not, that she said something along the lines of, that marriage is gone. This is the opportunity for a new marriage.
Yes.
And I thought that was, someone might say that's harsh, but I also felt that was incredibly freeing and empowering and hopeful.
Yes, and I love Esther Perel. I love her message, and I think that it's true. Your old marriage is over. And so the question becomes, do you want to start a new marriage with the same person? Do you want to learn how to create a different relationship that works better for both of you? And that's a question that I ask a lot to the couples that I work with.
And what I love about, that perspective is it's very future oriented and it involves both of them in a collaborative change for a new marriage, a new relationship. Instead of maybe perceiving it as we both did something bad, you can also reframe that in terms of let's look at what didn't go well in our marriage so we can move forward doing something different.
Exactly.
So, Alicia, we've talked about some of them, but can you share what are some of the, myths or misunderstandings about infidelity?
I guess the misperception is that it can't happen to me. I think it happens more than you think, and people don't disclose about what's happening in their relationships. And so you can see a couple who you think are doing great, and they might be having some marital issues, but it's something that I advise my clients to think very carefully about who you disclose this to. There's two types of people, and one of them is the type that goes and badmouths their partner to everyone under the sun who will listen out of anger. But then what happens is those disclosures have detrimental effects on the future. And so for women who are experiencing the affair or, have had their partner be unfaithful to them, it's difficult to know who to trust because, you can go and tell your mom about what your husband has done. But you might end up going to counseling and you might end up repairing all of the things and have an even better marriage. But your mom doesn't have the opportunity to sit with that and to do the work that you've done. And so she's still going to be angry and upset with your husband later. And that might not go away. So it's very tricky in the types of disclosures that you make after an affair. And so I think more people are having them, more people are staying together than you might think. But it happens, and it's because of, I think, the taboo and the subject matter and the negative implications that it can have in terms of disclosure. So it's happening more than people think. I think another myth or thing that I often hear is the kind of saying, once a cheater, always a cheater. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think it depends on why people are cheating. If there's multiple affairs and the person is addicted to the thrill, that might be something that's more of a sex addiction. However, if having an affair to feel more alive and because of a lack in their relationship, if people are willing to do the work and understand what caused them to stray, I think that it can be learned from and it can be something that draws couples closer, but also that something that won't happen again if they really do the work.
Yeah. Alicia, if you were to describe what couples who recover from infidelity do, what is different about the couples who actually do the work and move through and have a new marriage or relationship? What are the things that you see, their qualities?
One is their commitment. So they're committed above all else. And so they're willing to do things much differently. They might move to another city. They might change their parenting, impedes on their time as a couple. They learn how to communicate intimately, which they might have done initially in their relationship, but because of all of the life things that happen and the everyday things that become the focus, they stop connecting in an intimate way. And so they learn how to do that again, and they learn how to trust. And sometimes we can say, well, I trusted this person. I trusted them with all, I married them and I trusted them. But if you really kind of pull back the layers, sometimes you're withholding from your partner for reasons of resentment or things that have happened, along the years of marriage. And I think that's what the couples who make it do. They understand that this marriage is different than their first marriage with each other, and they're committed to making those changes and to being vulnerable with one another.
Alicia, if there's someone listening right now who is in a relationship and is struggling with the impact of an affair, what would be some words of wisdom that you could offer this person?
That they're not alone, that they're not crazy. And so a lot of times people think that they're crazy. I'm obsessed with the fact that my partner has cheated on me. And I can't stop thinking about it. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I just can't stop. I can't stop checking their phone. I can't stop checking their email. And so they have these intrusive, obsessive thoughts, but it's normal. And they aren't alone in what they're experiencing because the impact of an affair is a psychological trauma. And so if people who go to war, and I might get some flack for comparing it in this way, but people who go to war and they see heinous, horrible things come back and they're impacted and they can't stop thinking about it. It's a psychological trauma. And so is an affair. So is the thought that this person that you were so connected to, that you gave everything to, could do this to you. That's also a trauma.
And yeah, it is incredibly traumatizing. I'm really glad that you're emphasizing that it's an emotional or psychological trauma, but it is a trauma.
Yes. And so the human response to trauma, whether it be as a result of a war or a result of an accident or a result of a death, they're the same, and they show up in our practices as depression and anxiety. But people think that they're not supposed to experience these things. They think that they should just be able to get over it. But I think as clinicians, it's important too for us to hold a space for them to deal with their trauma.
Alicia, what are your favorite resources for those who are impacted by infidelity or affairs?
So I really like Esther Perel's work. Her book is called Mating in Captivity, and that's not necessarily about affair recovery. However, she talks a lot about the shift in our society and the expectations that we place on marriage. You know, she says marriage used to be about who gets the cows when I die and making sure we know whose kids these belong to. But now our partner is supposed to be our best friend, the most amazing lover we've ever had, our confidant. They're supposed to be an amazing parent. And we put so much pressure on this relationship. And I think that the conversation that she started around this is important. It's important for us to understand that the construct of marriage has shifted. And so how do we deal with that? And how do we kind of navigate marriage in our society now? Another great book that I recommend to a lot of my couples is Getting Past the Affair. And that's by Douglas Snyder. And so it's really a program kind of in book form for each partner with exercises for them to work through. So I do a lot of work out of there. And then one of my favorites also is by Janice Abrams. I think she's an excellent speaker. I've had an opportunity to take some of her trainings and stuff. And her book is called After the Affair.
You know, Alicia, I really appreciate your time and your insights that you shared today. I especially right now, as I was listening to you describing these resources, I love how in Mating in Captivity, the Esther Perel's book, you know, just about looking at how we now view marriage and just the unrealistic expectations of this person being all of these things to us.
Yes.
And we don't even realize that we carry that construct or that belief, these expectations with us. And no wonder we're disappointed.
Exactly. And I think it's important, like John Gottman says, you know, you're going to have these perpetual arguments over and over and over again that occur in relationships. And I think that's important. Are you going to have the perfect marriage? Probably not. But you can have one that's good enough, that's excellent. It's not going to be perfect because the expectation is unrealistic.
Yeah. So really, you know, teaching couples, teaching individuals to see this other person as a human being with flaws, doing the best they can. And as a relationship, as flawed, and they're doing the best they can within this relationship. And there is no perfect relationship or perfect partner.
There really isn't. But it's about learning to be vulnerable in your imperfectness and allowing your partner to see that and love you anyways.
Alicia, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Everything that you've shared has been very meaningful and insightful, and I know that it will resonate and be helpful to so many of our listeners.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I do have a free gift for your listeners. They can go to my website, which is ranchocounseling.com/women in depth. I actually have a guide for some of the more practical things on surviving infidelity. So it's a guide called My Husband Cheated, and it talks all about what you can do next. And in addition to that, for your listeners, I'm giving away some journal prompts that are for those who have experienced this and are looking to take some action in terms of their healing. So it's a list of prompts that can get them writing and thinking about their relationship in a different way.
Thank you so much, Alicia. We will also make sure that we include a link to your site and to those resources that you've created and provided for our listeners. It'll be linked to our show notes as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.